Very nice to meet you all. And I have about 12 slides I will share with you. There will be some introduction first, and I will spend about half an hour to explain what I learned working at a Japanese large company for the last 6 years. So first of all, let me introduce the company that I'm working for. It's a company called Niterra. For those of you who are into automotive, you might have heard about our main product, which is spark plugs. The brand is NGK Spark Plugs. And we had tremendous success with this product over the last 80 plus years. We actually are in the US celebrating 60 years of the company this year, and then in Japan actually celebrating 90 years in November of this year. So we're very proud of that. And if we could, we would probably just produce spark plugs until the end of time. So, when you see this Formula One car here, we are the main sponsor, and 8 out of 9 teams are using our spark plugs. So anyway, so we are very, very, very good at that part. But things happen. So the EV, electric vehicles, are coming, and they are transitioning and threaten our core business. So therefore, since about 15 years, the company has been trying to change things and invest into other businesses and develop something different, but none of it really stuck. And so about 6 years ago, the board made a decision, and they said anything that is not spark plugs, we're going to put into a huge division. It was more than 500 people, and we're going to hire a person from outside, not an internal person, who, for various reasons that I will explain further, internal person is not the best fit for such a transformation management. So let's bring on board somebody from outside, and that person is me. So who am I? So I'm Dirk Schapeler. I have been working in global leadership roles in automotive, but also in material science, in pharmaceuticals. And for the last 6 years at a Japanese company, I actually live and work partly in Silicon Valley and in Nagoya in Japan. I worked in large German, French, American, and now Japanese companies. So therefore, I can probably give you a bit of an overview. And of course, every nation, every culture has its pros and its cons. There is no perfect one. So that's, I think, as a heads up, you don't think that Japan is worse or better. It depends on what criteria you apply. My background is in mechatronics engineering. I studied in Germany. As you can hear from my accent, I'm German, 54 years old. I have 3 kids. They are all over the world, living in Hong Kong, in Germany, and in Silicon Valley, and I'm married. So this team that I'm leading today, it transformed a lot over the last 6 years, and I'm not going to go into the details of that. But fundamentally speaking, we are today a team that is about 35 people strong. We established a $100 million fund about 4 years ago and invest into early stage and up to Series B companies worldwide. Now, the areas that we are investing into are somewhat adjacent in some areas to our core know-how, which is in ceramics. But then we are also trying to go into new areas like medical technologies or mobility or energy and environment. And as you can see on the bottom right, the 5-year plan, and I'm going to extrapolate a little bit more what that means, is to significantly increase the share of our revenue and of our business in so-called non-ICE business. ICE stands for internal combustion engine. So spark plugs are used for combustion engine, which is what you have in a traditional car. And non-ICE means that we are using our knowledge and our know-how, for example, in sensors that are also used in ICE engines. So we're using that, for example, in the medical space or in the energy space. So that is the meaning of this circle. We want to increase the share of non-internal combustion engine business. That is the North Star of what we are working on. Now, I'd like to get to the more generic part of my learnings and give you some advice. I don't have all the answers, but I have some advice and some learnings that I'd like to share with you. So first of all, when you look at these pictures on the right-hand side, for me, this is maybe a little bit simplistic example, but you see how Japan is well organized and is planning. You know, on the left hand, on the top side, you see like scooters that you can rent. I think these ones are Lime maybe here or something like that. And then you see the ones from Loop in Japan. You know, Japan, there's like a square. Please park the scooter in the square, take a photo and tell us where it is. Whereas, you know, in other parts of the world, this is not as well organized. And, you know, there's pros and cons with that. You know, on my experience is, for example, sometimes there is no parking spot empty in Japan, so you cannot park your scooter. So it's just a very simplistic example how things are organized and well structured in Japan. Same for like the platforms. You go to a typical Japanese train station, and there's like so many trains. But even as a foreigner, you find very easily where you're going to sit, which train it is, what color it is. I mean, it's very well done. Just as an example. So what does it mean in a corporate setting? Well, in a corporate setting, one thing that I really want you to get familiar with and take away from my talk today is Japan has a very strong, you know, passion to plan things. So there is the so-called fiscal year, which typically lasts from end of March till from 1st of April to end of March. And for this year, everything is very well planned. So you can, on one hand, use that for whatever you need to change or whatever your task is in a company, whether you need to grow a business or whether you need to transform it or exit it, whatever it might be. But this fiscal year plan is something that once it is approved, you can actually stick to it. My experience, having worked in German, French, American companies, you know, you plan, of course, something, but then 3 months later, something happens and the plans get, you know, thrown over and change significantly, and you might start all over. In Japanese companies, this is less the case. The downside of this is that, of course, you also need to have a good plan and you need to know where are you going to go exactly. As an example, right now, as you know, in the US with the Trump administration, there's a lot of changes. Just this last weekend again, you know, there were like changes to the tariffs and, you know, the court overthrow the current decision. This leads to very significant impact in a Japanese company like ours. We usually are making a you know, a plan, but this year we don't have such a fixed plan because simply there's so much things that are unforeseen. Then the other thing that I'd like to share beyond the 1 year plan is there's also 5 year and 10 year plans. So the 5 year plan typically referred to as midterm plan, and the 10 year plan referred to as long-term plan. Those are plans that have a much more strategic direction and setting, showing where is the overall direction of the company. Are we going to, I don't know, enter the medical business, even though this is not something that we have as a business today? These kind of things are fixed in there. They are carefully studied. It takes a lot of time to prepare these plans. And then there's budget assigned to it, usually even planned already 5 years ahead, 5 years ahead, and then confirmed with the yearly plan. So this is different from many other cultures. And I have to admit myself, I underestimated on one hand the strengths and the power of such a plan, but on the other hand, also how fixed it is. So, you know, you have to balance out what you commit to, what you want to do, and then use this kind of a tool that is very accepted and very typical in Japanese companies in order to move forward the task that you're assigned to. Now, what does such a plan look like? Not too surprising, metrics and numbers are mandatory, of course, like I think in pretty much any company. And then when you miss milestones, you know, this can damage your credibility quite a lot. So my experience is that when you have like this Silicon Valley style, you know, culture, hey, the sky is blue, we're gonna rock the world, and we're gonna have a hockey stick growth curve. Don't do it. You know, that doesn't work in a Japanese company. It's better to you know, under promise and over deliver, as I like to say. This goes down much better in my experience than the other way around. So please consider that carefully, and that is definitely a big difference, especially for the American style that I know from many other companies. Then, if you do miss the planning cycle, for example, you want to do something and come up with an idea, and it's 1 month after the plan was fixed, well, you might have missed the boat. So please be aware of when what plan, annual plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan is fixed, and how much in advance you need to present your ideas and fight for them and do whatever steps need to be done to get them approved. So as mentioned, these are, in my opinion, very powerful tools. They tend to work better in industries where a long planning cycle is, of course, possible. Think about industries that have heavy investments, take long to build, like infrastructure, like construction, like heavy machinery, to some extent automotive, where a new car gets issued, and that takes about 4 years on average. So in other industries like software, consumer electronics, innovation in general, it is more difficult to work with these plans, but you might not have a really real choice. So might as well leverage them. Now, I'd like to transition to another topic, which is how do decisions get made in Japanese organizations? So, first of all, there are titles, like senior vice president something, or, head of something. But then there's also the authority and the influence that people have. I think this is very similar to pretty much any large organization in the world. You have these informal leaders, opinion makers, influencers. The difference maybe, and that is what you see here in the last column, if you were to join a Japanese company, I'm not sure where you're at in your career or what your motivation is for this seminar, but let's assume you were to join a Japanese organization. So my recommendation, what you should do in the first 90 days when you join is, talk to as many people as you can, and on all levels, not just the top level or how high you can reach, but also to people that are on working level, the contributors, the team members, in order to map out who is actually influencing the decision making and who are the stakeholders in the company. So it does take some time, and it does take maybe one or the other, evening event. I like to say sometimes sake might help, or other ways to informally meet. So please consider that. It's really important to find out, because otherwise you might be surprised about entering an official meeting, having amazing pitch, having all the data, and running against a brick wall. Then the next point is a little bit related to that, but there is, of course, a strong hierarchy in Japanese organization. In my opinion, I perceive it as probably a little bit stronger than in American or European companies. And there's a lot of consensus building that happens beforehand. So before the official meeting, there's a lot of alignment meeting. Some refer to it as nimawashi. You have like a casual discussion. What do you think? What is your opinion? So you need to understand how this is typically done in the organization that you are in. This, in my opinion, can be done well if you learn about past projects. For example, there was something that is maybe a similar investment or a similar change or a similar growth, and you try to find out, well, how was the decision made for that particular project? And ideally, you ask multiple people so that you get a really good map and understanding of how decision making is done, and how hierarchy influences it, and titles and authority. And then there is I call it a built-in consensus building. Yes, the CEO in our company, for example, has a lot of power, and sometimes I have the impression he's probably the only one who can really make a decision. but there is a consensus building built in, because some of these function like the strategy team or like the board or like operations or business leader, their responsibilities in the definition is a little bit ambiguous. So it's intended to overlap, and that forces them to always, well, talk to the other person and at least understand what is their opinion and why their opinion might be different. And this leads to a better decision, because sometimes the decision is probably not quite there yet. And the discussion and what appears to maybe foreigners sometimes as being a lengthy, annoying process is actually making the decision much better. So please consider that part as well. And then lastly, something this, I find myself, I had to learn that, because in Germany we have a very direct culture. We say, okay, it's black, it's white, I don't like it. This kind of direct way of talking and expressing their opinion is not very well accepted in Japanese culture. Japanese culture is based on preserving harmony and trying to not be too direct. So what I would recommend you learn in the first 90 days, learn how to ask clarifying questions. You don't have to tell immediately what is your opinion or why didn't you like it or what is your expression. Just try to ask the question that might lead towards the other person understanding what your intention might be. So this is maybe a skill you should consider learning. Now, coming a little bit more towards generic leadership lessons that I apply and that are not specific to Japanese culture, but that I learned over more than 25 years of professional experience now and working in different cultures and companies. These ones I apply consistently. So I try to always hire people that are better than me, at least in one discipline, ideally in multiple disciplines. So then I can, I can learn from them and I can trust them with tasks. So bring them on board, find them, bring them on board, get them excited, and then empower them. Let them do a thing, delegate authority to them. This has been working for the most part very well for me, and it made my teams much, much better and more powerful. Then I only know this one from a German saying, and translated means something like, speaking is silver, listening is gold. So, especially in Japanese companies, you find that people tend to be very humble. They are not showing off at all. It takes some time to learn how much actually your colleagues might know and be capable of. So please consider that. It takes some time to build that trust level and to ask the right questions for them to open up. And sometimes you might be thinking, well, this person's just sitting there not saying anything. Well, that doesn't mean that they are not hugely valuable contributor to what you're trying to do. You just need to find the right key to unlock that potential. Please take the time for that. And then lastly, please try to find your ikigai, your purpose in life. My purpose in life, I'm not sure it's a very good one, but the way that I live by is that I always have been trying to work on things that are new, that are transformative, that are trying to really change something to be better. Whether it's a product or a process or an organization. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, and I enjoy doing that. And sometimes I look at some colleagues, they work in some finance role or some crypto thing, and making maybe a lot of money, but I could never do that. So please try to find what is your ikigai and what you enjoy, and focus on that. I think that's the best recipe to be successful. And I like to cite. There's a guy in LA. His name is Peter Diamandis. He always says, "Well, try to influence 1 billion people, and then if you can do that, even if it's a small thing that helps them, the money will follow. You will have a successful career, and you will eventually also have a good salary or a successful financial return." Now. Again, I'd like to come back a little bit more towards the Japanese side of things. So first of all, I'd like to share also uh, you know, the humility and being humble is really something that Japanese colleagues are known for. And I have to say that I did not realize it as much when I joined the organization and learned over time. So please consider that, as I already pointed out. Trust must be built over time. Take different approaches to build trust, either through your actions, through listening to them, taking them serious, trying to understand them, and build a level of trust. It's really, really important probably more important in Japanese organizations than in any other in the world that I'm aware of. Then informal networks are critical. As I mentioned before, authority and hierarchy is kind of like built in with consensus building, and you need to understand who is building the consensus, who is influencing it, and consider that. Then one thing that I learned, this was a costly learning, quite frankly, because I tried it multiple times. When in Western organizations, a lot of times we say, "Hey, let's just get everybody in a room. Let's go somewhere nice, and then sit down and lock ourselves up in a room and discuss a topic. And then after the 2 days, we get out of there, and everything will be clear." Doesn't work in a Japanese organization, at least not as well. Especially if you are having a mixed team. So in my case, people are from 15 different countries, ranging from Eastern Europe to Australia to, and of course, Japanese colleagues. What happens is that the Japanese colleagues are not comfortable to share as openly, and they get kind of like overheard because you have all the English speakers or people that have better English skills or have a louder voice or are more expressive to talk a lot, and you don't get the real opinion from the Japanese colleagues. So, you might consider getting everybody in a room, but don't expect that this will be as an effective tool as it can be, for example, in an American company. And then a lot of times people in Japan, they do learn a lot of English. Their English is actually decent, but it's mostly on the written level. It's not on the speaking level, and therefore written preparation is oftentimes much more important than it is in other cultures. So, this is a tiny, small difference. Nevertheless, consider it. The verbal expression of thoughts might not be enough. Now, these days, we are lucky enough that we have all these AI bots and AI, transcribing tools. So we are not as much relying on, writing it down ourselves. Nevertheless, keep it in mind. And then lastly, I'd like to share Japanese language is highly context driven. So I learned that myself because I have been making an effort to learn Japanese for the last, more than 5 years now. And quite frankly, I still suck at it, but, I really try. And it gave me, however, something that helps me to understand why sometimes a clear left or right, up or down kind of decision or expression is not so clear when people talk in Japanese, because the whole language is more context driven. It depends on who is saying what to what person, what is the environment, what is the context. So, in English or in many European languages, you can express a thought in one sentence and it becomes very clear. In Japanese, this is different. So, if you get a chance, learn some Japanese. It doesn't matter, the effort counts, but it helps you to also understand the culture and the environment. Please try it. So I'm almost at the end of my talk, but let me give you a few other thoughts here. And I'm sharing this with you not to judge or anything. The first few slides where I talked about the company that I'm working for, this is usually what the external world gets to see. I'm trying to give you a view behind the doors, what is under the hood. So it's not judgmental, it's just what I observe. Okay. So, of course, in Japan, people have a strong pride in their culture and national identity. It is historically seen rather closed society. It only opened up, 150 years ago, roughly, as to global commercial interactions. There's even today still rather low immigration, and it's actually currently still considered again on a political level. And there's high ethnic homogeneity. When you walk around in Tokyo, you might not see it, but when you walk around in even Nagoya, which is a 10 million people city, there's not that many foreigners, which is very different to when you compare to Silicon Valley or other parts. So you have to consider that. There is a more or less strong Japan first mindset. It doesn't mean that it's seen as bad. It's just seen as more normal, and this influences the decision making. So I personally observed this when I might propose to work with this company as a partner in Japan, this company as a partner in Korea, and this one in I don't know, in Pittsburgh. And the one in Pittsburgh actually might be the one that is the best partner, but the decision might still be to work with the one in Japan because it's a Japanese company. I can understand there's a bit of bias, but I think it's a little bit stronger in Japan than in other countries. Then foreigners are seen as different, not disliked. So please don't take it the wrong way, but it's just like you're never a Japanese, right? And so you have to somehow live with that and accept that, and hopefully you can. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for you to work in this environment. And then again, as I said, learn Japanese a little bit just to learn about the culture and the context. Um, a few facts about the work environment and how to navigate it. So first of all, lifetime employment is common. Especially when you're from the US, you're probably used to, well, you have like employment at will, which means like you might get fired the next day, unfortunately. So that this can happen in Japan. It's rather the opposite with its advantages and disadvantages. It means also that you might sometimes find people that do not have a role anymore because simply the business changed and their knowledge is no longer needed and they couldn't be retrained. So there's even a term for it, which is translated to English means something like window watcher. So now some people come in the office and they don't really have a job, and they're still kept on a payroll even though they don't have anything real to contribute. It's of course that everybody tries to avoid that, but still it can happen. There is a role and pay reduction around the age of 57 in some Japanese companies. I'm not sure how common it is, but I'm not going to go into all of these details here, but please learn about it and be aware of it, that this 57 age and getting stripped of your title has an impact. So learn about it. And then there is a retirement common age, which is 60. And then the retirement pay starts at 65, which means that a lot of people get hired back on contracts for those 5 years. And then there's, of course, extremely high trust and honesty in Japanese society. I'm not sure whether you ever had any experience with that, but for me personally, I've had, for example, my phone slip out of my pocket in a cab. The next day, somebody sent it to me for free, even, and people are just like that. I mean, it's like extremely safe and honest culture in Japan in general, and really very different to many other cultures that I'm aware of. Business statements are taken literally, so that for me had a big impact working on investment topics in Silicon Valley, where you always have to consider, well, somebody's trying to sell you their idea and trying to convince you to invest into their company. In Japan, if somebody says something, we're gonna achieve that sales. it's taken much more literally, and you have to make sure that there is not a big miscommunication or big gap in understanding what is really meant when you talk, for example, about business numbers. And then lastly, the gaijin card. So gaijin means foreigner. So when you are in Japan, Japanese people are very forgiving, and not just for cultural things that, or things that you might be doing wrong when you're at a dinner or something, but also there can be things that you are allowed to be forgiven to ask. For example, for me, when I go to talk to one of our board members and ask them a question a little bit more direct, I'm probably more forgiven than if one of my Japanese colleagues does that. Of course, please don't overdo it, but you can sometimes play this card because you have other disadvantages. So my last slide, my key takeaways for you. Please, before you do anything in your Japanese environment, company, whether it's working on growth, whether it's working on anything that you want to change or transform, understand the culture and the environment before you drive that change or that plan of yours that you have. Please spend the time on that. It's well worth it. I can only recommend it to you. Then timing matters as much as strategy. It means that use the right point in time when you propose something, when you want to fight for your idea, and of course have the right strategy in the background. But if your timing is off, the best strategy might be not be leveraged anytime soon. Use the long-term planning as an advantage, not as a hurdle. See it as something that can help you, but be aware of how it works. Then build trust before you influence anybody, and try to use the people that can help you to influence decision making and the organization. And then lastly, adapt your ambition to the cultural context. What this means is you might be coming from like a West Coast mindset. Hey, let's rock this boat. Let's try to show everybody what we can do here. Well, try to really first understand very well what is the environment of this organization, where they are coming from, and what can they understand and absorb, and what can they really move. So balance that out and time it right. With that, I'm at the end of my talk, and thank you so much for listening.